My father handed my spoiled brother $120,000 for medical school but refused to support my business. Now they're pleading for financial help, claiming my brother's life is at risk. Before I dive into what happened, let me give you some background on my family to help you understand. I'm a 21-year-old male, and I come from a broken home. My parents divorced when I was in middle school after my dad had an affair with his secretary. I didn't learn the full story until I was older, but the signs of trouble in their marriage were always there. As a child, I could feel the tension that seemed to permeate their relationship. They stayed together, but it was clear that their love had faded, and there was something fundamentally wrong. While other kids had what looked like a happy family, my family was far from it. I also have an older brother. You'd think that growing up in a broken family would have brought us closer, but it didn't. My brother Eric has always been a jerk. From a young age, he seemed to take every opportunity to put me down and bully me. This dynamic led our parents to take sides. My mom was usually on my side, while my dad always backed Eric. Eric was a terrible person to grow up with. He was mean and relentless, always using his friends to gang up on me. I was smaller than him, both physically and in stature, so my only recourse was to run to my mom. This just made me look even worse, earning me the nickname, Mama's Boy. My mother would often reprimand Eric, but it rarely made a difference because my dad always took his side, insisting that I needed to learn to play rough to become a man. But I didn't want to learn how to be tough. I just wanted to live in peace. For some reason, my dad and brother seemed to resent the idea of me having a calm, peaceful life. They were relentless in their attempts to bother me in any way they could. My mom did her best to protect me, but she had her hands full. As a stay-at-home mom, she had to juggle raising us and keeping the house in order. It was nearly impossible for her to always be there to prevent me from being bullied by my brother or my dad. That's how things were for me growing up. Over time, I learned to accept it and stopped fighting against it, deciding it was easier to just let it go. Then in 8th grade, my mother sat me down and told me that she was separating from my dad. By that time, I was old enough to understand that they had their reasons, and this separation was probably for the best. My mother didn't give me all the details about their divorce, but I assumed it was because my dad was difficult to live with, and she had simply had enough. It wasn't until high school that I discovered the real reason she left. I found out that she had discovered text messages on my dad's phone between him and his secretary. That was the breaking point for her, as she had already endured enough, but she couldn't tolerate infidelity. We had a heart-to-heart conversation that day, and she revealed that my dad had never wanted a second child. He had even expressed his desire to not have another child, but my mother had refused to give me up, even threatening to divorce him. At the time, he was setting up his business, and they were struggling financially. They were already struggling with the expenses of raising one child, and the idea of another child was daunting. However, my mother stood firm, insisting that she would not give me up and was determined to carry through with the pregnancy. At the time, they did have a babysitter. My mother had been working before I was born, and she suggested continuing her job and borrowing money from her father, my grandpa, until my dad's business took off. However, my dad was adamant against taking money from his father-in-law. He told my mother that the only way he would agree to a second child was if she quit her job and stayed home. He expected her to disagree and to terminate the pregnancy, but she didn't. That decision marked the beginning of their troubles. My mother admitted that both of them could have handled things better, but the way my father began resenting and mistreating me after I was born made her feel awful. That's why she never tried to reconcile with him. She told me that my difficult childhood was partly her fault, and she apologized, feeling she should have left sooner. She had believed that staying would be better for us, but it only made things worse. Ultimately, she had to leave after being hurt in the worst possible way. Despite everything, part of her still loved my dad. She had held out hope that he might change, but he never did, and she was just repeatedly disappointed. The distance between them grew, and he ended up cheating, which only deepened the rift. I love my mother, I really do, but I believe she could have been more honest with me about many things much earlier. She only disclosed all of this to me in my final year of high school, even though they divorced when I was in middle school. Unfortunately, I had to spend every weekend with my dad. My parents had arranged custody so that I would spend weekends with my dad and my brother with my mom. This arrangement worked because I despised spending time with my dad and even more with my brother. I made it clear during the divorce that I didn't want to be with my dad at the same time as my brother, as that would be a total nightmare. My mother agreed, and her lawyer helped finalize the terms. Despite my dad's objections, believing it was important for me to bond with my brother, I felt it was impossible to bond with someone as monstrous as him. Thankfully, my mother took my side and arranged for me to spend the minimum amount of time with my dad and my brother. I mostly grew up with her. However, holidays were always dreadful because after the divorce, my dad started dating his secretary. My mother couldn't stand it, and while my dad had the good sense not to bring her around during holiday gatherings, my mother knew the truth and despised it. The holidays were always tense, but we had to endure them because my dad wanted it, and my mother felt she had already put enough distance between us. This was the least she could do to maintain the facade of a family and keep us together for those times. We tried to get along, but it was all superficial. Deep down, none of us really liked each other. Both my brother and I had clearly chosen which parent we preferred, and so had our parents, which really wasn't right. So I guess it's safe to say my family was pretty dysfunctional, and I had a very strange childhood. Despite everything, I kept in touch with my dad even after learning the truth in my senior year. My mother had told me that he was supposed to pay for my college, so I had to maintain a good relationship with him. She never spoke up about these issues earlier because she was afraid I'd fight with him and lose my college fund. After the divorce, my mother started working, but she hadn't saved nearly enough to afford the college I wanted, so my dad seemed like my best option. It was really hard for me, but I tried my best to stay on good terms with him. It all turned out to be pretty futile though, because I never had a college fund to begin with, and my dad continued to mistreat and belittle me. A few months before graduation, some friends and I decided to start our own business instead of going to college. It was a huge risk since we were all just 18 with very little experience, but we were passionate about our venture and didn't believe that college would necessarily increase our chances of success. It was a leap of faith we felt we had to take. I was the one who initially proposed the idea of starting our own business. What began as a casual joke quickly turned into a serious plan. We decided to launch a clothing and accessories business aimed at revolutionizing the industry. Most stores in our neighborhood either sold mass-produced items from big corporations or were small shops that didn't cater to how teenagers wanted to dress and look. My friends and I struggled to find clothes that allowed us to express our true selves. We either ended up with outdated thrift store finds or dressed like our dads. It dawned on us that many people our age might feel the same way, and that's how our brand was born. I'm proud to say that we've expanded significantly since then, and I'm glad I took the risk of not going to college. I believe we've done pretty well for ourselves. It was me and 3 of my friends who spent months brainstorming and developing a business plan. We decided that 2 of us would handle the clothing design, which wasn't too difficult since we were already skilled in art and passionate about fashion. The other 2 focused on the business side of things. I was tasked with finding investors, which was going to be challenging because we were just a group of 18-year-olds with little experience and no college degrees. We lacked formal education in fashion or business. All we had was passion. It might sound idealistic, but we were determined and had made up our minds. For a few weeks, I kept this plan to myself, but eventually I couldn't hide it from my mother any longer, so I told her everything. She was initially nervous and urged me to at least go to college and get a degree. I assured her I was serious about this venture and just needed her support. She eventually came around but warned me that convincing my father to help would be very difficult. He already disapproved of men having traditionally feminine interests, and if he found out I was venturing into the fashion industry, he might never speak to me again. We needed money, and my friends and I were being rejected by every investor. Most didn't even bother to meet with us before declining because nobody wanted to take a chance on us, which was understandable. The only people who would consider our business were friends and family, so we quickly realized we had to rely on them. About 2 months before graduation, I decided to talk to my father about funding our business. My friends had already convinced their parents, after a lot of pleading and begging, to invest in our venture, but I knew my dad would be the toughest to convince. First, I had to tell him that I hadn't applied to any colleges because my friends and I had started working on our brand, and that's what we wanted to pursue. That's why I needed my college fund. When I first mentioned that I wasn't going to college, he didn't seem to care and said he was fine with whatever I chose to do. But when I told him I needed the money from my fund to finance our startup, he replied that he hadn't set aside any money for me because he was serious about not caring about what I did. That was when I discovered that I never had a college fund to begin with because my father had already spent everything on my brother, who had gone to medical school. My brother started 4 years earlier, and I knew medical school was expensive, but I assumed my dad's business was doing well enough to cover both of us. What I didn't realize was that my brother wasn't just taking money for school, he was also receiving substantial funds from my dad to maintain a lavish lifestyle while he was supposed to be studying. My dad was happy to support him. He told me that he had written a check to my brother around the time he left for medical school, giving him his entire life savings, nearly $120,000. Since then, he had been living off his salary without any qualms. He had also assumed that I wouldn't be going to college, something he was right about, but for all the wrong reasons. That's why he never bothered to save for me or even told me that I didn't have a college fund. He explained that he believed Eric was the brighter son and never expected someone as stupid as me to want to go to college, let alone get accepted anywhere. By not applying and deciding to start a business, I had apparently fulfilled his expectations of me. At first, I thought he was joking, but after a few minutes, I realized he was serious. He had actually given his entire life savings to Eric, leaving nothing for me. I completely lost it. I was not only furious that he hadn't set aside any money for me, but also enraged by his comments calling me stupid and praising Eric as bright. That day, I finally let loose and told him exactly what I thought of him because I couldn't take it anymore. I had expected at least some help from him, planning to pay him back once my business started making money, but he couldn't even do that much because he was so selfish and harbored so much hatred towards me. I was inconsolable. Even though I had always known my dad favored Eric, I hadn't seen this coming. We had a massive fight, and that was the last time I spoke to my father. We had said everything that needed to be said, and there was nothing more to discuss. I decided that I wasn't going to see my dad ever again, and he seemed fine with it. Realizing that no matter how much he wanted, I was not going to turn out like Eric. After that, I moved in with my mom. It was tough letting my friends down and telling them that my dad wouldn't be funding our business, but they understood. My mother stepped in to help. She gave me some money herself and borrowed the rest from my grandparents, something I had tried to avoid because they're old and I wanted them to save their money for emergency medical expenses. They were happy to become investors and mentors, and I'm grateful they decided to support me. I'm pretty sure they're glad they did because our brand is thriving and we're as profitable as we could hope to be. We've become quite popular among teens, and it's hard to believe how much work it took to get here and how far we've come. I'd say my brand is far more successful than my dad's business, and I'm sure that was a bitter pill for him to swallow. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, something strange happened. After almost 3 years of no contact, my dad called me. Surprisingly, the call was about Eric, and he had some bad news for me. He started by congratulating me on the success of my business. I thought he might finally acknowledge how wrong he was, but instead he said they actually needed my help. He told me that Eric had just completed his residency, but was in serious trouble because he had started gambling while living away from home. My dad recently discovered that Eric was in significant debt, and not just a small amount. A substantial sum. He had people looking for him because he needed to pay up. Eric had to return home just days after finishing his residency and was currently hiding out with my dad. But that wasn't enough because, sooner or later, those people would find him. Apparently, these creditors were dangerous, and my dad was terrified that something bad might happen to him. That's where I came in. He said he needed me to lend them money to pay off the debt so they could start fresh. My dad is living off his salary now, and he expected me to help them out since my business was doing so well. He thought it might not be such a big deal for me as it was for him. That was all he said. There was no apology for the past, and he acted like we had always had a cordial relationship. There wasn't even a hint of remorse in his tone, and it really pissed me off that he just expected me to help them because he called. So I got really angry and told him he could find help elsewhere. I said he was a fool to expect anything from me. Then I hung up and blocked his number. After the call, I received a few more from an unknown number, which I assumed were from my brother, so I blocked him as well, cutting off all contact. It's been 2 weeks now, and I can't shake off the guilt. I feel really bad and conflicted about my decision not to help them, even though I have the means. Since I blocked them, I've been feeling like I still have a chance to do the right thing, but I'm unsure if they deserve it, and I'm really confused about what to do. Update 1. Hey guys, thank you so much for your responses. I've decided to sleep on this for a few more days and think about my next steps instead of letting my emotions take over. I hadn't talked to my mother about it because I didn't want to stress her out. She had cut off my dad and Eric around the same time I stopped speaking to them, but I know she worries about my brother. She's a mom, after all. I knew that if I told her Eric was in debt, she'd get really anxious, but I felt I had to talk to her. So I told her everything, and surprisingly she said I had no reason to help them because they had never looked out for me or had my back. It would have been a different story if my father and brother had apologized for how they mistreated me my entire life, but they didn't even do that, which was the bare minimum. I had no reason to feel sorry for them because Eric dug this grave for himself, and now he could lie in it. My mother said she would have been worried if he were any younger, but he's in his early 20s and knew exactly what he was doing. He screwed up, and my dad allowed it to happen by encouraging him to be the worst he could be his entire life. Now the two of them could clean up this mess. I thought it was great advice, even though I'm not sure what I want to do right now. I'm still going to think about it, but honestly, my mother has a point. This is my hard-earned money, and I don't want to just give it away to a gambling addict. Besides, I don't even know if they were telling me the truth or if it was just a story to get cash out of me. Honestly, I wouldn't put it past them because, all things considered, I'm a lot more successful than they had bargained for, and I'm sure it's not easy for them to accept this. Of course, they will try anything in their power to mess things up for me. Update 2, Hey, so I made the post last week. Yesterday, I decided to do some digging to get the full picture so I could make an informed decision and not deal with the constant guilt of hanging my family out to dry. I know they've wronged me, but I'm a paranoid guy, and I just wanted to make sure nothing truly bad was going to happen to them because I don't think I'd be able to forgive myself if it did. I'd feel responsible if something did happen. So I thought I'd pay them a visit and see what was up. I went over to my father's house, but to my surprise, I found out they had sold the house around 3 weeks ago, and a new family was already living in it. I spoke to the neighbors and found out the house had been on the market for almost a month. Apparently, the realtor made a huge sale, and my dad received a substantial amount of money because the house was in a prime location and was worth quite a lot. But this was 3 weeks ago, and my dad had already received the money by the time he called me. I couldn't understand why he felt the need to ask me for money as well. It was confusing, and I had no idea what to make of it until this morning when I received a call from my dad's lawyer, who told me I was going to be excluded from my father's will because I had apparently failed the test he had set for me. You read that right? They were not in any real trouble. My dad was just testing me to see if I would have their back, and based on that, he would include me in the inheritance. He had sold the house because he was moving to live with Eric, who had recently finished his residency. Since he wanted to wrap everything up here before he left, he created this little test for me. I can't even imagine what kind of messed up mind would think this is an acceptable thing to do, and I'm honestly glad I failed his little test because I really don't need his money. He can disappear off the face of the earth tomorrow, and I still wouldn't care because I had been caring a lot in the past few weeks, and it got me nowhere, so no more of that. Gosh, it's still mind-boggling how insensitive and psychotic the two of them are. Some people are just not capable of changing and think the world revolves around them. I'm just glad the business is doing well, and I probably won't need to rely on anybody's inheritance for the rest of my life if my business continues to grow at this rate. But the mystery has been solved, and there's no reason for me to worry. It's just sad because now if something actually happens, I probably won't even believe them. They're pathetic, and I just absolutely have to say that. Update 3. Hello, so this update comes almost a year after my last one, and I'm thrilled to share that I'm now engaged. I met my future wife last year, and while getting engaged after just a year might seem too soon for some, you know what they say? When you know, you just know. Plus, I've known my fiancée since we were kids. She had moved away for a while, but she's back now, and we reconnected last year, quickly realizing we didn't want to waste any more time. However, the update isn't about her, although I could go on forever about our journey. It's about my dad and brother's reaction to the engagement news. For some reason, they decided to reach out to me via email to say that, while they were happy for me and my fiancé, they wouldn't be attending the wedding. They felt it was inappropriate for them to be at an event where the host doesn't like or respect them. So they wished me the best but made it clear they wouldn't be joining any of the wedding festivities. My mom, my fiancé, my friends, and pretty much everyone I know saw that email because I forwarded it to them, and we all had a good laugh. It was pretty bold of them to assume they would even be invited, but it's just typical of them to think the world revolves around them. At least their antics keep us entertained.